In the late 1970s, New York City was a place of grit and glamour, a city where you could disappear in a crowd or rise to the top of the skyline if you knew the right hand to shake. But in the quiet, polished hallways of the Dalton School on the Upper East Side, a prestigious prep school for the children of the city's elite, there was a new face. He wasn't a titan of industry yet. He was just Mr. Epstein, a physics and math teacher. He was young, only in his early 20s, with a mop of dark hair and a smile that seemed a little too confident for someone who didn't even have a college degree. That was the first red flag, the first glitch in the matrix that people ignored. How does a college dropout get hired to teach the children of millionaires at one of the most exclusive schools in America? He was hired by the headmaster, Donald Barr. And from the very beginning, he didn't fit the mold. He wasn't there to grade papers. He was there to network. He treated the students not like children, but like peers, blurring lines that should never be blurred. But he was charming. He was the cool teacher. And more importantly, he was tutoring the son of Alan Greenberg, the CEO of Bear Stearns, one of the biggest investment banks on Wall Street. That was his ticket. In a move that defies all logic, this teacher left the classroom and walked straight onto the trading floor of Bear Stearns. He didn't start in the mailroom. He started as a junior assistant and rocketed to limited partner in record time. It was as if he had a cheat code for life. He was a natural at the game of money, not earning it, but moving it. He understood that on Wall Street, perception was the only reality that mattered. If you acted like you owned the room, people would assume you bought the building. By the 1980s, he had spun himself into a new character. The teacher was gone. Now he was the bounty hunter. That's what he told people. He claimed he traveled the world recovering stolen money for governments. And the ultra-wealthy. Was it true? Nobody really knew. But it sounded dangerous, and in the high society circles of Manhattan, danger was an aphrodisiac. He was building a myth, brick by brick. He started his own firm, J. Epstein and Company, and he had a very specific rule. He would only take clients who had $1 billion or more. It was an arrogant pitch, but it worked. It made him seem exclusive. It made him seem untouchable. And then he found his golden goose, Leslie Wexner, the retail king behind Victoria's Secret. Epstein somehow convinced this billionaire to give him full power of attorney. He had total control over Wexner's fortune. It was the kind of trust usually reserved for a spouse. Yet here was this mysterious financier holding the keys to the kingdom. With that power came the crown jewel of his deception, the house. 9 East 71st Street. It wasn't just a house. It was a fortress. The Herbert N. Strauss Mansion was the largest private residence in Manhattan, a towering limestone behemoth that felt more like a government institution than a home. And the things inside, they were the stuff of nightmares wrapped in velvet. If you were invited in, and everyone wanted to be invited in, you stepped onto a sidewalk that was heated from underneath so the snow would never touch his shoes. The front door was massive, intimidating. Inside, the walls were lined with art that cost more than most people earn in a lifetime. But there were details that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up. A life-sized stuffed tiger, a row of individually framed prosthetic eyeballs in the hallway, watching you as you walked to the parlor. A grand piano with a stuffed black poodle resting on top of it. Who does that? It wasn't just eccentric, it was a signal. It said, I can do anything. I can own anything. Life and death are just decor to me. He was the great Gatsby of the 90s, but with a soul blacker than oil. He collected people like he collected weird artifacts. He was friends. with everyone. You'd walk into a dinner party at his house and see a Nobel Prize-winning scientist sitting next to a Victoria's Secret model, sitting next to a former president, sitting next to a Hollywood star. He built a spider web of influence so dense that he became essential to the social ecosystem of the elite. He was the connector, the man who knew everyone. And because he knew everyone, he was protected by everyone. No one asked where the money really came from. No one asked why there were always so many young girls, assistants, and staff moving through the shadows of that massive house. They were just scenery to the guests, invisible figures in the background of the great man's life. But the spider was hungry, and the web was sticky. He had constructed the perfect mask, the philanthropist, the genius, the friend to the powerful. But behind those heavy oak doors on 71st Street, the air was getting thin. The trap was set, not just for money, but for something much, much darker. He had the world fooled, and he was just getting started. The teacher had become the master, and his classroom was now a chamber of horrors hidden in plain sight. If Jeffrey Epstein was the spider, Ghislaine Maxwell was the one who lured the flies. She didn't look like a monster. That was the most terrifying thing about her. She looked like royalty. She was the daughter of Robert Maxwell, a media tycoon who was larger than life, a man who could make governments tremble. She grew up in a world of private jets and endless luxury, a princess in a high-tower castle in England. But castles crumble. In 1991, her father's naked body was found floating in the Atlantic Ocean near the Canary Islands, having fallen off his superyacht, the Lady Ghislaine. Was it suicide? Murder? An accident? The world never really knew, but the empire collapsed overnight. It turned out her father was a fraud, stealing hundreds of millions from his employees' pension funds. Ghislaine went from being the darling of high society to the daughter of a crook. Her shield was gone. She was exposed, vulnerable, and desperate for a new protector. She fled to New York, the only place where you can reinvent yourself if your name is stained. And there, waiting in the shadows of the Upper East Side, was Jeffrey. He was the answer to her prayers, and she was the missing piece to his puzzle. He had the money, but he was new money. He was rough around the edges, a college dropout trying to play aristocrat. Ghislaine, she was the real deal. She spoke with that cut-glass British accent that made everything sound legitimate. She knew how to hold a teacup, how to organize a gala, how to charm a prince. When they got together, it wasn't a romance. It was a merger of darkness. She moved into his life and took over. She organized his home, his staff, and his social calendar. But her real job, the job that would stain her soul forever, was much more sinister. She became the hunter. Epstein was awkward with young girls. He was creepy. But Ghislaine, she was the cool big sister. She was the sophisticated mentor. She was a woman. And because she was a woman, the victims let their guard down. How could it be dangerous if she is here? They thought. That was the trap. She would scour the streets, not like a predator in a trench coat, but like a fairy godmother. She went to parks, to movie theaters, to outside high schools. She looked for the pretty ones, sure, but she also looked for the broken ones. The girls who had holes in their shoes, the girls who looked like they needed a friend. She would approach them with a smile that could melt ice. "You have such a lovely face," she would say. "Have you ever thought about modeling? Or maybe, I have a friend who is a very wealthy philanthropist, and he loves to help young students with their education." It sounded like a dream. A scholarship? A modeling career? Money to help mom with the rent? She offered them the world. She brought them into the fold, taking them shopping, buying them clothes, making them feel special. She was grooming them, stripping away their defenses layer by layer, making them feel indebted to her. Once they were in the house, the atmosphere shifted, but only slightly at first. She was the buffer. She would explain the massage job. "It's not what you think," she'd whisper, like it was a secret between friends. "He's just very stressed. He has a bad back. You just need to make him feel better." She normalized the abnormal. She made the unthinkable seem like a chore. She would even demonstrate. Can you imagine the horror of that? A grown woman, a socialite, showing a teenager how to touch a man? She destroyed the universal code of protection between women. She wasn't a victim. She was the architect of the abuse. She managed the schedule. She kept the little black book of names. She ensured the flow of fresh faces never stopped. There were times when the girls would hesitate, when the instinct to run would flare up in their eyes. Ghislaine would be there, her voice dropping an octave, turning cold. "Don't be ungrateful," she would snap. Or she would switch back to the sweet mentor. "He can do so much for you. Don't throw this opportunity away." She weaponized hope. She weaponized their poverty. She made them feel that leaving the house was a failure, that they were the ones who were wrong for feeling uncomfortable. She was the gatekeeper of the nightmare. Without her, Epstein was just a rich pervert in a big house. With her, he was the head of an international trafficking ring that operated with the efficiency of a corporation. She polished the cage so the bars looked like gold. And by the time the girls realized the gold was paint and the door was locked, Ghislaine was already looking for the next one, smiling that perfect, aristocratic smile, hunting for fresh prey in the daylight while the darkness waited at home. In Palm Beach, Florida, the sun shines differently. It's a blinding white gold that bleaches the pavement and sparkles off the hoods of Bentleys and Rolls-Royces. It's a place where the world feels safe, manicured, and exceptionally quiet. The hedges are cut with laser precision. The ocean breeze carries the scent of money and jasmine. It was the perfect camouflage. Down here, far away from the chaotic energy of New York, Jeffrey Epstein had another castle. This one wasn't a limestone fortress. It was a sprawling estate near the ocean, a place that looked like paradise. But inside, he built a machine designed to consume innocence with the efficiency of a factory line. And the fuel for this machine wasn't imported, it was local. It was the high school girls from the surrounding neighborhoods, the ones who drove beat-up Hondas and worked after-school jobs at the mall, dreaming of a life that looked even a fraction like the one behind Epstein's gates. The genius of his trap in Palm Beach was that he didn't have to go out and hunt anymore. He turned the victims into the hunters. It was a pyramid scheme of abuse. It started small. A girl would be approached, maybe by an older assistant, maybe by Ghislaine, and told about a wealthy man who needed massages for his bad back. "It's easy money," they were told. "Just rub his shoulders. He wears underwear. You stay dressed. $200 for an hour." $200? To a 16-year-old in the mid-2000s, that was a fortune. That was freedom. That was a new pair of jeans, gas money, a ticket out. The first girl would go. She would walk up that long driveway, heart pounding, past the perfectly manicured palm trees. The house was massive, silent, and cold. The air conditioning was always set to a chill. The butler, often a man named Wanalesi, would let her in. It felt professional. It felt clinical. She would be led to the massage room. And there he was, the billionaire. He wasn't scary at first. He was just odd. He would lie on the table. The girl would give a terrible massage. She wasn't a professional. She was a child. But he didn't complain. He would pay her in crisp, fresh $100 bills. But then came the hook. "You did a great job," he'd say. Or maybe Ghislaine would intercept her on the way out. "He really liked you. If you know any friends who are pretty and need some money, bring them. You get a referral fee." A referral fee, like selling magazines, like a twisted Avon lady. Suddenly, the girl wasn't just a victim. She was an employee. She was incentivized to bring her best friend, her sister, her cousin. "It's easy," she'd tell them. "He's weird, but he pays." And just like that, the virus spread through the local high schools. Royal Palm Beach High, Forest Hill High. The whispers went through the locker rooms and the cafeterias. "Go to the house with the big door. Ask for Jeffrey." The second visit was never like the first. The rules would shift, subtly, almost imperceptibly. "It's too hot in here," he might say. "Why don't you take your shirt off? It's more comfortable." Or, "I need you to work higher up on my leg." The boundaries were like sand in the tide, constantly eroding. If a girl hesitated, the warmth would vanish. The nice billionaire would become cold, disappointed. "I thought you were mature," the handler might scold. "Don't you want to come back? Don't you want the money?" The fear of losing that easy cash, combined with the intimidation of being in a mansion with a man who knew presidents, paralyzed them. They were frogs in boiling water. By the time the massage turned into assault, by the time the hands wandered where they should never go, the girls felt complicit. They had taken the money. They had recruited their friends. They were trapped in a web of their own making, or so they thought. But the architect was always him. He kept a stash of cash in the house, thousands of dollars, always ready. He treated them like vending machines. He would sometimes have multiple girls in the house at once, waiting, in different rooms, unaware of each other, or worse, painfully aware. The shame was the lock on the door. Who would they tell? The police? Who would believe a teenager from the wrong side of the tracks over a man who hosted charity dinners for the police department? He had donated to the local police foundation. He had the sheriff's number. He was untouchable. The Palm Beach house became a black hole. Girls went in smiling, thinking about buying a prom dress, and came out with a 1,000-yard stare, clutching cash that felt dirty in their hands, knowing they had to go back, because now they were part of the secret. The sunshine of Florida couldn't reach inside those walls. Inside, it was always dark, and the massage never ended. To the average person, a plane is just a bus with wings, crowded, uncomfortable, a necessary evil to get from point A to point B. But in the world Jeffrey Epstein built, the plane was the portal. It was a silver needle sewing together his empire of abuse, stitching New York to Palm Beach to New Mexico, and New Mexico to the island. It was a Boeing 727, a beast of an aircraft usually reserved for commercial airlines carrying 150 people. But Epstein didn't fly with the public. He flew with a select few, and he flew in a customized tube of luxury that the tabloids would later grimly christen the Lolita Express. The tail number was N908JE. If you saw those letters on the tarmac at Teterboro or West Palm Beach, you knew the circus was in town. But it wasn't a circus anyone wanted to join. It was a flying cage. Boarding that plane was a seduction in itself. There were no TSA lines, no metal detectors, no passport control officers peering at your ID. That was for the peasants. For Epstein's guests and his victims, it was a direct drive onto the tarmac. The car doors would open, and the humid air of the airport would hit you, smelling of jet fuel and money. You walked up the stairs, and suddenly, the laws of the United States of America felt very far away. The door hissed shut, sealing with a pressurized thud that signaled the end of your autonomy. Inside, it wasn't rows of cramped seats. It was a living room. Thick, plush carpets that your feet sank into, expensive wood paneling. But the centerpiece, the thing that made your stomach drop the moment you saw it, was the bed. Most private jets have reclining leather chairs, maybe a sofa. Epstein's plane had a bed right in the main cabin. It wasn't hidden in a bedroom. It was out in the open, a stark, undeniable statement of intent. It was covered in high thread count sheets, sometimes with a massage table set up nearby. It was a theater of depravity at 40,000 feet. The pilots were up front, behind a locked door. They were paid well, very well, to fly the plane and never, ever look back. They were the silent chauffeurs of a nightmare. And in the back, it was a terrifying mix of the world's most powerful men and girls who should have been doing their homework. Imagine being 15 years old. You've never been on a plane before. You're told you're going on a trip to help with modeling or massage. You sit on a couch that costs more than your parents' house. Across from you might be a former president, a Hollywood actor, a famous scientist, or a prince. They are drinking champagne. They are laughing. And they are ignoring the fact that you are a child. The cognitive dissonance is deafening. The presence of these titans of industry normalized the horror. If he is here, the girl thinks, looking at a face she recognizes from the news, then this must be okay. This must be how the rich live. But then the plane levels off. The seatbelt sign doesn't ding. The atmosphere shifts. The massage begins. At 30,000 feet, there is nowhere to run. You can't lock yourself in the bathroom forever. You can't call your mom. There's no signal. You are trapped in a metal tube hurtling through the stratosphere, entirely at the mercy of a man who viewed people as biological toys. The turbulence wasn't outside. It was in the cabin. The air felt heavy, charged with a predatory static. The girls were often instructed to change into comfortable clothes, tiny robes, bikinis, while the men remained fully dressed, watching, discussing global politics or physics equations while a crime was being committed inches away. The disconnect was psychotic. The flight logs, those meticulously kept manifestos of doom, would later become the Rosetta Stone of the scandal. They listed the names, the dates, the destinations. Virginia Roberts, Jane Doe number 3, interspersed with names that could open any door in Washington. The plane was a sanctuary of sin where the rules of gravity didn't apply to morality. It was a mobile crime scene that crossed state lines and international borders with impunity. When the wheels finally touched down, usually on a private landing strip in the Virgin Islands or the dusty runway near his Zorro Ranch in New Mexico, the victims weren't just landing in a new place. They were landing in a new reality. They had been transported from the world of safety to a world where Jeffrey Epstein was the only law, and the Lolita Express was the only way back home. But the return ticket always came with a price: your silence. If the plane was the cage, Little St. James was the prison. But it didn't look like a prison. It looked like a screensaver. 72 acres of lush, emerald green land floating in the turquoise waters of the U.S. Virgin Islands. To the locals on neighboring St. Thomas, it was Pedophile Island, a place whispered about in dark corners of bars. But to the girls stepping off the helicopter or the private ferry, often a boat named Lady Ghislaine, it was disorienting. The sun was brighter here. The air smelled of hibiscus and salt. It was so beautiful that your brain refused to believe anything bad could happen here. That was the island's first lie. You would land on the helipad, the rotors whipping the palm trees into a frenzy. Epstein would be there, or perhaps the house manager, waiting in a golf cart. There were no cars, just silence and the sound of the ocean. As you drove up the winding paths to the main compound, you'd pass things that felt off. Massive, colorful statues of parrots that looked a little too watching. A strange, life-sized sundial. And then, standing on a promontory overlooking the sea, was the building that would haunt the nightmares of everyone who saw it, the temple. It was a boxy structure painted in stark blue and white horizontal stripes, looking like something out of a twisted cartoon or a Masonic fever dream. It had a golden dome on top that caught the sun like a glaring eye. Flanking the entrance were two large, gold statues. Some said they were of Poseidon, others said they were pagan gods. But the most terrifying detail was the door. It was heavy, reinforced, and seemed to lead into the side of the cliff itself. Rumors swirled that it was just a music room, a gym, a study. But the victims felt a primal dread when they looked at it. It didn't feel like a room for music. It felt like a mouth. The main residence was just as unsettling. It was an open-air compound, designed so that the wind flowed through every room. There were no secrets from the wind, but plenty of secrets from the world. The walls were adorned with pictures of Epstein shaking hands with the most powerful men on earth. Presidents, prime ministers, princes. It was a gallery of intimidation. "Look who my friends are," the photos said. "Who are you to say no?" The staff moved like ghosts. Groundskeepers, cleaners, chefs, they kept their heads down. They were paid to be blind. They saw young girls, barely out of puberty, wandering the pool decks in bikinis, looking lost and terrified, and they looked away. Their silence was the mortar that held the island together. Underneath the luxury, the island was a fortress of surveillance. Cameras were everywhere, hidden in the palm trees, tucked into the eaves. Of the cabanas, Epstein was obsessed with control. He wanted to own the moment, to capture the sin. And then there were the rumors of what lay beneath. Whispers of underground tunnels, of soundproof rooms dug deep into the volcanic rock where a scream would just bounce off the concrete walls. Whether the tunnels were extensive labyrinths or just maintenance corridors didn't matter to the victims. The feeling of being underground, of being buried alive while the sun shone above, was real enough. The psychological terror of the island was the water. On the mainland, you can run. You can find a payphone. You can flag down a car. On Little St. James, the ocean was the wall. You could stand on the edge of the cliff and see the lights of St. Thomas in the distance. Civilization, police, safety, but it might as well have been the moon. The current was too strong to swim. The boats were locked. The helicopters were his. You were stranded in paradise with a monster who controlled the food you ate, the bed you slept in, and the air you breathed. The beauty of the island became a mockery. The blue sky wasn't freedom, it was the lid of the jar. And when night fell, and the utter blackness of the ocean surrounded the compound, the only light came from the main house, where the party was just beginning, and there was absolutely nowhere to hide. Power is a strange thing. It isn't just about having money in the bank. It's about who picks up the phone when you call. And for Jeffrey Epstein, his phone book was his shield, his armor, and his weapon. He didn't just know powerful people. He collected them. He understood that if he surrounded himself with the most untouchable figures on the planet, he would become untouchable by association. He built a social firewall so thick that no police officer, no prosecutor, and certainly no teenage girl could ever hope to break through it. He wasn't just a rich guy in a mansion. He was the man standing next to the president. Take Bill Clinton, for example, the former leader of the free world. In the early 2000s, after his presidency, Clinton took trips on Epstein's plane to Africa for charitable causes. Pictures exist of them standing together, smiling, looking like old friends. Now, imagine you are a victim. You are trapped in this web, thinking about going to the police. And then you see a photo of your abuser laughing with the man who used to run the country. What goes through your mind? You realize that the system isn't going to help you because the system is friends with him. Epstein used Clinton's presence like a badge of immunity. He didn't just fly him around. He brandished the connection like a weapon to silence anyone who whispered against him. You think you can touch me? I fly the president. Then there was Donald Trump. Before the politics, before the White House, they were just two billionaires in Palm Beach, circling the same social orbit. They were neighbors. They partied together. In 2002, Trump was quoted saying Epstein was a terrific guy and a lot of fun to be with. He even added the chilling line, "It is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side." That quote, hidden in a magazine for years, shows just how open the secret was. They were rivals and friends, two kings of their own little worlds, validating each other's existence. For a long time, Epstein was the only person who could walk into Mar-a-Lago and be treated like royalty. It was a club of men who believed the rules were written for other people. But it wasn't just politicians. That would be too simple. Epstein wanted to own every corner of human achievement. He courted scientists, Nobel Prize winners, the smartest minds on Earth. The most jarring, almost hallucinogenic image from the island is the presence of Stephen Hawking. Yes, the world-renowned physicist. He was there, on Little St. James, attending a science conference Epstein funded. There are photos of him at a barbecue. On the island, the submarine visible in the background. It defies all logic. What was the smartest man in the world doing in the epicenter of a sex trafficking ring? It was Epstein's ultimate flex. He was telling the world, I own the geniuses, too. By funding their research, by stroking their egos, he bought their silence, or at least their willful blindness. And then, the crown jewel of his collection, Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, the Queen's favorite son. This wasn't just a casual acquaintance. This was a man who stayed in Epstein's home, who invited Epstein to royal events, who was photographed walking in Central Park with him even after Epstein's first conviction. The allegations involving Prince Andrew are some of the darkest in the entire saga, involving young girls trafficked to London and the island. But for years, the royal family was the ultimate shield. Who arrests a prince? Epstein knew that as long as he had a royal in his pocket, he was operating above the law of any nation. This circle of untouchables created a reality distortion field. When the police in Palm Beach finally started to look into him, they were terrified. They weren't investigating a pervert. They were investigating a man who could destroy their careers with a single phone call. The Blue Book, Epstein's contact list, was a who's who of global power. It froze the justice system. It made victims feel insane. It created a world where a predator could operate in broad daylight, surrounded by Secret Service agents and royalty, and nobody saw a thing. He wasn't hiding in the shadows anymore. He was hiding in the light, blinded by the glare of his own powerful friends. It started with a single phone call. In 2005, a mother in Palm Beach found something she shouldn't have, a suggestive massage booklet in her 14-year-old daughter's bedroom. The daughter broke down. She told her mom about the nice man in the big house with the heavy door, the man who paid for massages. The mother, horrified, called the Palm Beach police. For the first time, the invisible wall around Jeffrey Epstein cracked. The police chief, Michael Ryder, wasn't part of the social club. He was a cop. He didn't care about the gala dinners or the famous friends. He listened to the girl, and then he found another, and another. The snowball began to roll. Ryder's team launched Operation Risky Business. For 11 months, they surveilled the mansion. They saw the pattern. They saw the vans pulling up, the young girls, literal children in school uniforms, walking in, staying for an hour, and walking out clutching cash. It was a conveyor belt of abuse. They gathered enough evidence to bury him. They had the flight logs. They had the testimony. They raided the house and found a treasure trove of incriminating photos, massage tables, and sex toys hidden in safes. They were ready to charge him with multiple counts of sex trafficking, crimes that carried a life sentence. The state prosecutors were sharpening their knives. But then, something strange happened. Something that doesn't happen to normal criminals. The federal government stepped in. The U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida was Alexander Acosta. The case was federal now, which should have been bad news for Epstein. Federal prison is no joke. But Epstein didn't just hire a lawyer. He hired a battalion. He brought in the dream team, Alan Dershowitz, Ken Starr, the heavy hitters who had defended presidents, and O.J. Simpson. They didn't just defend him. They went on the offensive. They investigated the prosecutors. They threatened to burn the whole system down. And the system blinked. What followed is widely considered the most corrupt plea deal in American judicial history. It was a sweetheart deal so sweet it was practically poison. Instead of life in prison, the federal prosecutors agreed to a non-prosecution agreement. It was a secret document, hidden in a safe, that did two terrifying things. First, it allowed Epstein to plead guilty to a single, minor state charge of solicitation of prostitution, a slap on the wrist that sounded like he picked up a hooker on a street corner, not that he ran a global trafficking ring. Second, and this is the part that still haunts legal scholars, it granted immunity not just to Epstein, but to any potential co-conspirators. That meant anyone who helped him, Ghislaine Maxwell, the recruiters, the pilots, the powerful friends, was safe. It was a get-out-of-jail-free card for the entire network. The sentence was a joke, 18 months, but it wasn't even real jail. He was housed in a private wing of the Palm Beach County Stockade. And here is the kicker. He was granted work release. For 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, Epstein was allowed to leave his cell, get into a chauffeured car, and be driven to his office in West Palm Beach. He spent his days in luxury, conducting business, meeting with lawyers, and yes, even seeing young women, before returning to the jail to sleep. He even had the door of his cell left unlocked, so he could sleep comfortably. It was a mockery of justice. But the cruelest part was what they did to the victims. The federal law, the Crime Victims' Rights Act, requires prosecutors to confer with victims before making a deal. Acosta's office didn't do that. They kept the deal secret from the very girls Epstein had abused. They let the victims believe they were still fighting, that a trial was coming, that the monster would be caged. Then, one day, they woke up to the news that he was a free man. They had been erased. Their trauma was traded away in a backroom deal by men in expensive suits who decided that Jeffrey Epstein was too big to fail. He walked away with a registered sex offender status that he treated like a minor inconvenience, confident that he had beaten the game. He thought he had bought his freedom forever. But he forgot that secrets, like bodies, have a way of rising to the surface. For 10 years, the lie held. The non-prosecution agreement was supposed to be the final word, a legal tombstone weighing down the truth so heavily that it would never rise again. Jeffrey Epstein went back to his life. He went back to the galas, the science conferences, the high society dinners. He walked the streets of New York a free man, branded a sex offender but treated like a king. The system had worked exactly as he designed it. Money bought silence, and power bought immunity. But he made one critical mistake. He forgot that victims grow up. He forgot that trauma doesn't have an expiration date. And he underestimated a woman with a notepad and a refusal to be intimidated. Her name was Julie K. Brown. She wasn't a federal agent. She was an investigative journalist for the Miami Herald. In 2018, nearly a decade after the sham deal, she started asking the questions that everyone else had been too afraid, or too paid off, to ask. Why did he get off so easy? Who were the other men? And where were the girls now? She didn't find prostitutes, as the lawyers had called them. She found women. Women with scars. Women whose lives had been shattered by a man who treated them like disposable commodities. They were terrified to speak. They had been told for years that Epstein was untouchable, that he had cameras everywhere, that he would ruin them if they talked. But Brown listened. She didn't judge. She chronicled. She published Perversion of Justice. It wasn't just a news story. It was an earthquake. It laid bare the corruption of the 2008 plea deal, exposing how Alexander Acosta, the U.S. attorney, had bent over backward to protect a billionaire pedophile. The story went viral. The public outrage was instant and furious. It was the era of #MeToo, and suddenly, the man who had been hiding in plain sight was the most hated man in America. The shield of invincibility began to crack. The Department of Justice, embarrassed and under pressure, couldn't look away anymore. In the Southern District of New York, a new team of prosecutors, unburdened by the old deals, quietly opened a new file. They weren't looking at the old crimes. They were looking for new ones. And they found them. The house of cards began to sway. Epstein, arrogant to the end, didn't run. He didn't flee to a country with no extradition treaty. He stayed in his Manhattan mansion, believing he was still the puppet master. But the strings were being cut. The FBI was watching. They were building a case not on the old solicitation charges, but on sex trafficking of minors, federal charges that carried massive prison time. They spoke to the victims Brown had uncovered. They followed the money. They prepared a raid that would shatter his world. When the FBI agents finally breached the heavy oak doors of 9 East 71st Street, it wasn't a polite visit. It was an invasion. They tore through the limestone fortress that had hidden his secrets for decades. What they found inside was a museum of depravity. In a locked safe, they found piles of cash and loose diamonds, a go-bag for a man always ready to run. They found a fake Austrian passport with Epstein's photo but a different name, listing his residence as Saudi Arabia. But the most damning evidence was the media. Thousands of loose photographs, CDs labeled with names, hard drives. It was a library of abuse. The agents found photos of girls who looked far too young to be there. They found the massage tables. They found the bizarre, creepy decor, the prosthetic eyeballs, the human-sized chessboard that the victims had described in their nightmares. It was all real. Every whisper, every crazy rumor was sitting there in physical form. The mansion wasn't a home. It was a crime scene frozen in amber. The evidence was overwhelming. The sweetheart deal, in Florida could not protect him from this. The immunity was gone. The powerful friend stopped answering his calls. The spider was no longer the hunter. He was trapped in his own web, and the boots of the FBI were stomping down the hall. The house of cards had collapsed, and underneath the rubble, the truth was finally, screamingly, visible. On July 6, 2019, the private jet touched down at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, arriving from Paris. It was the Lolita Express, the same plane that had ferried presidents and princes to an island of sin. Jeffrey Epstein likely expected the usual routine: the tarmac greeting, the private car, the smooth ride back to his Manhattan mansion. He had done this 1,000 times. But this time, the tarmac was swarming. The FBI agents were waiting. They weren't there to negotiate. They were there to arrest him on federal charges of sex trafficking of minors. The handcuffs clicked shut. The billionaire, the man who believed he was above the law, was shoved into the back of a government vehicle. The ride wasn't to a luxury estate. It was to the Metropolitan Correctional Center, MCC, in Lower Manhattan. The MCC is widely considered one of the worst federal prisons in America. It's been called the Guantanamo of New York. It's a place of concrete, steel, and despair. For a man who lived in a world of heated sidewalks and private chefs, the MCC was a shock to the system that likely broke his mind before the rope ever did. The cells were small, freezing, and infested with vermin. The screams of other inmates echoed through the vents. This wasn't the country club prison in Florida where he had served his time a decade earlier. This was hard time. And this time, there was no bail. His lawyers, the best money could buy, argued that he should be allowed to stay in his mansion under house arrest, offering a massive bond. But the judge, Richard Berman, looked at the evidence found in the raid: the safe with $70,000 in cash, the loose diamonds, and the fake Austrian passport with a Saudi Arabian residence, and saw only one thing: a flight risk. He denied bail. The door slammed shut, and for the first time in his life, Jeffrey Epstein was truly trapped. The weeks that followed were a descent into paranoia. He was placed in a cell with Nicholas Tartaglione, a former cop accused of quadruple homicide. It was a bizarre pairing: the soft-handed financier and the hulking brute. On July 23rd, Epstein was found semi-conscious in his cell with marks on his neck. He claimed he was attacked. Officials suspected a suicide attempt. He was placed on suicide watch, a grueling protocol where lights are kept on 24/7 and guards check on you every 15 minutes. He was miserable. He was meeting with his lawyers for up to 12 hours a day, trying to find a loophole, a way out, but the walls were closing in. And then, inexplicably, on July 29th, just 6 days later, he was taken off suicide watch. He was moved to a new cell in the Special Housing Unit, SHU, Cell 15, and his roommate was transferred out. The night of August 9th, 2019, was a perfect storm of failures. It was the kind of night that breeds conspiracy theories for a century. Epstein was alone in his cell. The two guards assigned to watch the unit, Tova Noel and Michael Thomas, were overworked and tired. They were supposed to check on him every 30 minutes. Instead, the logs would later show they falsified the records. They didn't check. For hours, they sat at their desk, just 15 feet away from the most high-profile prisoner in the world, browsing the internet for furniture and sports news, and, crucially, sleeping. They were asleep while the most valuable witness in a global trafficking ring was left unmonitored. Inside the cell, something dark was happening. We will never know exactly what went through his mind in those final hours. Was it the realization that he would die in prison? Was it the fear of what the other inmates would do to him? Or was it something else? He took a bedsheet. He tied it to the top bunk, and he leaned forward. It wasn't a long drop. It was a slow, strangling asphyxiation. He knelt toward the floor until the darkness took him. But the coincidences didn't. Stop with the sleeping guards. The cameras outside his cell, the mechanical eyes that should have recorded everything, malfunctioned. 2 cameras in front of his cell were broken. Footage from another camera was unusable. It was a blackout of information at the precise moment the world needed clarity. At 6:30 a.m. on August 10th, the guards finally went to check. They found him unresponsive. They tried to revive him, shouting, "Breathe, Epstein, breathe." But the billionaire was cold. He was wheeled out of the MCC on a gurney, a sheet over his face, looking smaller than he ever had in life. The news broke like a thunderclap. Jeffrey Epstein was dead. Suicide by hanging. The medical examiner confirmed it, but the public didn't buy it. How could the most important prisoner in the custody of the United States government die alone in a cell while guards slept and cameras failed? Epstein didn't kill himself, became a meme, a slogan, a belief held by millions. Whether he took his own life or not, the result was the same. The man who knew everything was gone. The secrets in his head died with him. And the victims, who had waited decades to see him face a jury, were robbed of their justice. The monster had escaped one last time, through the only door he had left. The world held its breath. The moment the news broke that Jeffrey Epstein was dead, a wave of fury washed over the globe. It wasn't relief, it was rage. The survivors, the women who had waited decades to look him in the eye and point a finger, had been robbed. The coward's way out. But as the conspiracy theories swirled and the memes about broken cameras took over the internet, a cold realization set in. The king was dead, but the queen was still out there. And she was gone. Ghislaine Maxwell, the socialite, the recruiter, the woman who had normalized the nightmare, had vanished into thin air. For nearly a year, she was a ghost. There were rumors she was in Paris, hiding in a submarine, or being sheltered by powerful friends. In Israel. But she wasn't in a palace. She was in the woods. She had bought a secluded, $1 million estate in Bradford, New Hampshire, a place called Tucked Away. It was fitting. She paid in cash, used a shell company, and changed her name. She spent her days in a gilded cage of her own making, paranoid and alone. When the FBI finally found her on July 2nd, 2020, they didn't find a confident aristocrat. They found a woman who had wrapped her cell phone in tinfoil to block the signal. She was trying to outsmart the very satellites she used to fly beneath. But when they kicked down the door at 8:30 in the morning, the game was over. Her trial in late 2021 was the reckoning that Epstein had escaped. For the first time, the victims weren't just names in a police file. They were voices in a courtroom. Women like Jane and Carolyn stood up and pointed at her. They described how she touched them, how she groomed them, how she served them up like meals. Ghislaine sat there, sketching on a notepad, looking bored, still playing the role of the superior elite. But the jury didn't buy it. They didn't see a socialite. They saw a predator. On December 29th, 2021, the verdict was read, guilty on 5 of 6 counts. The invincible woman was mortal after all. She was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. It was a victory, but it felt like a consolation prize. Why? Because she was just the middle manager. The clients, The men who had flown on the planes and visited the island were still free. Then came January 2024. The final seal was broken. A judge ordered the release of thousands of pages of documents from a civil lawsuit filed by Virginia Giuffre. The Epstein list. The world waited for the files to drop like they were waiting for a bomb to go off. And when they did, the shrapnel hit everyone. The documents didn't prove guilt for everyone named, but they painted a picture of a world so incestuous and corrupt it was hard to look at. The names were a kaleidoscope of power. There was Bill Clinton, mentioned in testimony where Epstein allegedly said the former president likes them young. There was Donald Trump, not accused of sexual acts in these specific files, but shown to be a close part of the social orbit, flying on the plane, dining in the mansions. There was Prince Andrew, accused in graphic detail by a woman named Johanna Schoberg of touching her breast while they sat on a couch with a puppet, a surreal, grotesque image of royalty behaving like a frat boy. And it got stranger. Stephen Hawking was named in an email where Epstein offered a reward to anyone who could prove the physicist didn't take part in an orgy, a bizarre attempt to clear his friend's name. Magician David Copperfield, pop star Michael Jackson. The files showed that Epstein's web caught everyone. But as the headlines faded, a chilling truth remained. The Black Book contained thousands of numbers. The unsealed documents were just a fraction of the reality. The system had managed to cut off the head of the snake and jail its handler, but the body of the beast was still alive. The men who visited the island, who flew on the Lolita Express, who hid behind their lawyers and their public relations teams, they are still out there. They are running companies, making laws, and appearing on your television screens. The story of Jeffrey Epstein didn't end in a jail cell in Manhattan. It continues in the silence of the powerful, in the trauma of the survivors who are still fighting for a day in court, and in the terrifying question that hangs over the entire saga. If they could protect a monster like him for 30 years, who else are they protecting right now?